The dozen men of Schoonhoven camp blend with the loggia pomours into a roar of beards and bad breath, singing and making endless toasts to their precious Starostin and to the great ocean gyre that flings a river of warm water up the coast of Spitzbergen, and within it the walrus that adorn the ends of Pomor spears and turn to gold coins in their purses. The gyre also conjures warmer air along the coast, which serves the reindeer, foxes, and eiders. Without the gyre, there'd be no reason to come here and no stories to tell.
Thanks for listening to Read Minnesota Books. I'm your host, Deborah Copperrood. Today's guest is Stacy Carlson. Her new novel, The Gyre, just won Alternating Current Press's Electric Book Award. Her essays and fiction have appeared in Tin House, Post Road, Inkwell, Sparkle and Blink, and elsewhere. She's also the author of the novel Among the Wonderful. Stacy is the recipient of fellowships from the Mesa Refuge, the Community of Writers, the Arctic Circle Jurassic Resident Artists Program, and Signal Fire. She received the Dana Portfolio Award and was a contributing author for the collection In Pieces, an anthology of fragmentary writing. Stacy holds an MFA in fiction from Sarah Lawrence College. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here.
What is your connection to Minnesota?
Well, I moved to Minnesota in 2021, so I am a newcomer here and a newcomer to the upper Midwest. So I'm still putting down roots. That said, some of my ancestors came from Sweden through Castle Gardens in New York and lived for about 10 years in Mora, Minnesota, in the early 19th century. So before they moved on all the way to Washington State with the timber industry, and that's where I grew up in Seattle. So when I moved here, I definitely went to Mora and Sandstone. That area is where my ancestors met each other. They married and then moved west. So it was beautiful to have that ancestral connection, even though I don't have living relatives here.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. Well, welcome to Minnesota.
Thank you.
And tell me about The Gyre.
The Gyre is a literary novel. It's set in the mid-19th century, and essentially it's my love letter to the far northern wilderness. It's about a Russian Orthodox monk with questionable motives who grew up in a monastery in the White Sea, and after becoming disillusioned with the worldliness that he sees as infiltrating his monastery, he decides that he would follow a long tradition of kind of northern hermits. And so he decides to become the northernmost holy man in the world. It's a fairly ego-driven decision, and he's very ill-equipped for this journey. But the book essentially is his long journey on foot up the western coast of Spitsbergen, which is a place that's north of Norway, north of Russia, and is a remote wilderness. So it's essentially a survival story, but involves a landscape that kind of reaches back out to the main character in many ways.
Yeah, he's so ill-equipped.
Yes.
I have to admit that when I started the book, I had to look up the Pomors and Spitsbergen to see if they were real or invented. But it's a real place, and you have actually been there on an artist residency. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. I think it's one of my life's great synchronicities that I embarked on writing a novel set in Svalbard a couple of years before I discovered that there is this incredible artist residency program that goes there. So I was, neck deep into research and discovery and creating the first draft of the book when somebody emailed me and said, "Hey, you should do this." And I looked at it and my heart just leapt. I mean, so it's an artist residency that every summer takes a group of about 25 artists and also some scientists up to Svalbard. Svalbard is the name of the whole island archipelago, and then Spitsbergen is the largest island. You'll hear me using the two names interchangeably, and part of that is because until 1920, the whole place was called Spitsbergen, and then it wasn't until 1920 that Norway kind of got stewardship of the whole archipelago, and they changed the name to Svalbard. So anyway, just to introduce
Mm.
a little bit of chaos into the naming process. Anyway, so yes, so I did this artist residency, which takes artists up to Svalbard, and basically we lived for 2 weeks on an antique Dutch schooner, a tall ship that sailed up the very coast that my main character is walking up in my book. And I just have to say, you probably hear the reverence in my voice. It was just an incredible experience, not only to reconcile the landscape, the imagined landscape with the real one, which was just incredible, but also to be surrounded by artists and to really have our entire itinerary dictated by artistic vision. So, for example, there was a performance artist who just really wanted to dance on an ice floe. So we had this captain who was wonderful, and he's like, well, okay, we're gonna head out to sea and find the pack ice, and so that wasn't really built into our itinerary before that day. But this woman's vision led us out onto the pack ice, which was really incredible. So there were just things like that happening all the time. And I'm still processing it. It was many years ago now that I did that, but it affected me very deeply.
Wow, I assumed that the artist residency inspired the novel, but like, how did you decide to set your novel in this very remote place before you even knew about that residency?
Yeah, like I said, the residency confluence with my novel was just such an incredible gift.
Hmm.
But yeah, so this question of why set your novel there, it sounds straightforward, but it's going to be difficult for me to pack all of my different answers into one nice package. So here goes. There are a lot of reasons why I set the novel there, from personal to just s- some of the ideas that I wanted to wrestle with in the book. So my first book is set in New York City. So after I finished that, or while I was finishing that, I knew fundamentally that I wanted my next book to be in the wilderness, to be set in the wilderness. I also really wanted to embrace an archetypal quest format. I love folklore and mythology, and so I just wanted to lean into that pretty hard for the book, it's one of the things I love the most about the book. There's elements of folklore drifting around it and through it. So, wilderness setting, I have a lot of lived experience going to Alaska. From when I was a kid, my family did this incredible kayaking trip on the Yukon River. And when I was 9 years old, and when I really was thinking about how to answer this question, again, it's a leap. Like, is this going to make sense? But a lot of the things that happened on that trip when I was 9 are actually at the heart of this book.
Oh,
I
okay.
saw a wolf, a black wolf as a kid. I was in a kayak on the river and then it was on shore, and the image of it, wild in its own territory, and its sort of the rightness of it being out there in this ample landscape, and then also just the thrill of seeing that affected me really deeply. Anyway, in the book, there's a wolf-like
Hmm.
character. This is a long way to say that I knew I wanted to set the novel in the far north. And then when I sort of discovered or started researching Svalbard, there were just many things that jumped out at me. One of them was actually the challenge of it because it is so remote. It's a place that a lot of people don't even know about, which in this day and age is kind of interesting when all this information about the world is just at our fingertips. So I became really fascinated by, like, what is this place? And for being so remote and very sparsely populated, it is a place that's drawn humans in several sort of charged moments in history. And by that, I mean, for one, the whaling industry brought people from all over the world to Svalbard. So there were Dutch camps and Basque spearmen and all sorts of cultural stuff happening up there during this finite period of time. And then also there's a fair amount of resource extraction going on up there. There's a Russian town that's still, Russian speaking coal mining town up there called Barentsburg. And then finally, it's also the site of the Global Seed Vault, and it's also a place where international teams of climate scientists are living right now, studying the consequences of climate change, because Svalbard's one of the places with the fastest rate of global warming.
Hmm.
So I just kind of became fascinated with, again, this very remote place, but there's so many stories there, including this Russian cultural heritage that included the Pomor hunters and the seafaring hunting culture of 18th and 19th century Russia, which is where I really put my talents in.
That's so great. So when you were done with the residency and still working on the book, what was your research process like when you were writing about the historical details? Like there's seal lard, brined reindeer meat, which sounds so gross. Like the clothing they wore, like I mean, lack of medical care that they had, the religion, everything.
Yeah, so my love of research is parallel to my love of creative writing. I mean, without one, I'm not sure if there would be the other. There's just
Mm.
something about my deep conviction that the past is not really past. It feels so alive to me when I do historical research. So I do bring heart to it, but otherwise my research practice is very intuitive. I spent a lot of time in university libraries looking up, 19th century travel accounts to the area. There was a history of Spitsbergen written, I believe, in 1906 by a visitor, a British visitor. And so a lot of details, you can glean from journals and accounts, of people visiting the landscape. Um, you know, the the food is interesting because food plays a significant role in the book, because at several times my main character is starving and he's obsessing about food, all the meals he left uneaten and things that he was craving. And so I had a lot of fun digging up, pre-Soviet era cookbooks and
Oh,
watching some
wow.
documentaries. I don't know if you know the Netflix series Chef's Table, but there is a
No.
wonderful episode with a young Russian chef in Moscow, current time, contemporary chef. But he had an obsession with, he called it like peasant cuisine, pre-Soviet cuisine of the countryside. And actually, I got some ideas through that show. I wrote down,
Okay.
oh, in particular, he goes on and on about moose lips as as a food. And I thought, okay, I got to put that in there somewhere.
I have read a lot of first person essays and memoir written in present tense. Less fiction, though. I happened to be reading your book, and then I listened to a fiction nonfiction podcast episode, recent one with Elizabeth McCracken. They talked about present tense in fiction. So I wonder, how did you land on using present tense for this novel?
Well, one of the things that crossed my mind early on was, well, not more than crossed my mind. One of the things I identified early on was that this book represents a very deep personal passion to me, which is just a love of wild places and kind of how important it felt to me to communicate that reverence and beauty and love. And but I'm a fiction writer. I wasn't going to hit anybody over the head with like, hey, Arctic landscapes need to be
Hmm.
preserved, and sometimes that means staying away from them. This sort of art of restraint that, our society may not be totally great at. But so I was wrestling with wanting to pull people in, have an immediacy to the story. Um, and be the choice of present tense really was a tool for that, to close that gap between mid 19th century Svalbard, Spitsbergen, like maybe all the historical details that, I mean, certainly I hope are not going to distance people from the heart of the story, but it could. So it was one of these tools that I utilized to try to close the distance between the reader and the heart of the book, if that makes sense.
Totally. And it has that effect. You feel like you are there really cold and starving.
Oh no.
Right along with Arcadi. So what do you like better, writing a first draft or revising? Um, and add in research too.
Oh, sure. Well, I did listen to several of your podcasts, and I thought, well, her other guests are saying revision, so maybe I should choose drafting, but I just couldn't do it. So I think here's another check mark for revision. Certainly, I love the openness and possibilities in writing a first draft, the kind of leaps and just more in a way, carefree. It can be at times, but then maybe more of the time, I find drafting to be a little bit of a head trip where that blinking cursor, that blank page, I'm certainly susceptible to perfectionism and just feeling, oh, overwhelmed by how far I have to go to even wrap my head around what the book is about. So that is tough. And so I think revision and definitely research, I find to be more, a joy-filled process where getting to the computer screen is a lot easier. Staying there is easier, and then a little bit of distance to consider the elements of craft that I want to utilize and developing themes and as well as the story just really happens more fully in revision.
This is your second work of historical fiction or novel length historical fiction. The first, you already mentioned it took place in 1840s New York. Is your next project historical fiction, or are you working on something else?
It sure is historical fiction. And I think I must have, in a past life, I must have lived in the 19th century because I keep returning to it. Although my next book, it could be partially taking place in the 1920s. So I'm starting to close the gap, but I'm pretty confident that not fast enough to ever catch up with the current time. I don't really see myself writing contemporary fiction. So short answer, yes, still deeply involved with research and the joy of developing imaginative ideas, inspired by some historical facts. But I do have another literary project that is not historical now that I think of it, but it's different. I'm editing a compendium of nonfiction by other authors. So that feels completely different.
Where does your current project take place, or can you even if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine
Oh,
too.
well, it's kind of in the still emerging form, but I'm happy to talk about it. So I have an idea of putting together kind of an almanac of herbalists writing about herbalism in their region. So I'm a studying herbalist myself, so I love plant medicine and learning about plants. And so I just had an idea, and I've started developing it pretty significantly so far. But I'm working with herbalists around the country so that hopefully the anthology will have representation from each major ecoregion of North America. So people talking about the herbal medicine of their region.
And back to Minnesota. Who is your favorite Minnesota writer?
Well, of course, it's so difficult to narrow it down. So I didn't try too hard to narrow it down to one, but so I love Danielle Sosin's Long Shining Waters. That novel really was one of the first books I read when I moved here, and um, just made me feel a kinship to Lake Superior and kind of the writing of that up north and getting to know that region. So I love that book. I also recently read Leif Enger's I Cheerfully Refuse. I believe, lives in Duluth, if I'm not mistaken. And this book is a near future dystopian novel set on Lake Superior, and I really loved it. I adore Louise Erdrich. I'm reading her latest, Python's Kiss. It's incredible. And then I guess I just would be remiss if I did not mention Tim O'Brien. and
Hmm.
the book Going After Cacciato, his 1978 novel, Going After Cacciato. I just, that is a book that I read probably in junior high or high school. It was one that my parents had read and left, on the coffee table. And while it's not set in Minnesota, it just introduced me to this incredible imaginative, kind of surrealist form. It was a book that was very formative to me in terms of incorporating fantastical elements into a serious core narrative. And it
Hmm.
really stuck with me. So I actually didn't realize that Tim O'Brien was from Minnesota until after I moved here. But he's definitely on the list.
Nice. Those are all good recommendations. Are you on social media? Where can folks follow you online?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Those are the two primary places where I am on the socials. On Instagram, my handle is Magnificent Sparrow. I
Okay.
think people can still find me by my name as well, but that's my handle. I don't know. I guess Facebook, just look me up. I also have a website where I have book information and events and stuff like that, stacycarlson.com.
Perfect. Well, I will link to those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was great to talk with you about your writing process and the gyre.
Thank you so much for having me, Deborah. It was great.
So, my recommendation, if you're listening today, Friday, May 15th, 2026, is to join me at Acorn Bookshop in St. Paul tonight at 6 o'clock p.m., where I'm moderating a discussion with Courtney Kosak, author of Girl Gone Wild, and Kelly Foster Lundquist, author of Beard. Courtney was on Read Minnesota Books recently, and now we get to meet her in person. If you're listening to this after May 15th and late to this news, no worries. The Rain Taxi Twin Cities calendar of literary events is the best place to find out about all the author readings in the metro area. So if a book talk sounds fun to you, go there to find literary events happening at local public libraries and bookstores. If you don't live in the Twin Cities, check out your local public library or bookstore, and I'm sure there will be author readings and signings happening. And that's it for this episode of Read Minnesota Books. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your app. Thanks for listening.